Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us to this new interview with Avenues International. I'm Camila Alfaro. I'm from the editorial staff of the magazine. During this interview, we will focus on the importance of the waters as a nutrient. And to talk about that, we invited Dr. Mojtaba Yegani. Dr. Moj, welcome and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you, and we are very happy to have you here. Then, just to let you know, for the people about Dr. Moj, he is the founder of the Poultry Knowledge Group and works as an independent consultant supporting the global poultry industry. He has been contributing to the poultry sector over the past 20 years in various capacities, such as live production, research and innovation, technical sales, marketing, and leadership in several countries and continents. And as a consultant, Dr. Moj has supported the poultry industry, focused on the following areas, such as technical solutions, services and research, innovation, and business development. Dr. Moj, to start with the discussion about the importance of the water as a nutrient, when we talk about nutrition for poultry, we tend to exclusively pay attention to, amino acids, minerals, vitamins, and other nutrients, but many nutritionists consider water as a forgotten nutrient since it is essential for several physiological processes, right? Then we have seen that a lack of quantity or quality of the water can impact the life performance and health of the birds. So, Dr. Moj, my first question is, why is water important for animals?
Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this podcast today. Whenever the topic of water quality comes up for me, the first thing that comes to my mind is Dr. Susan Watkins from University of Arkansas in the US. She has done a lot of work. Of course, she is retired now, but she has done a lot of work on water and water quality over the past 3 decades. And then I have listened to many of talks with Dr. Watkins and also visited some farms with her. It's amazing how much we know on water and water quality because of her research. I'm going to cover some of the work that Dr. Watkins has done during the interview as well. So to go back to your question, why water is important for chickens, basically the simple answer is for the same reason as we humans need water, right? Because water is the most important nutrients for poultry. And then they need water in order to maintain their activities, like day-to-day activities, in order to grow and also produce like eggs and meat. So, but the challenging part for us is that water usually, even though that it's the most important nutrient for poultry, but it doesn't get a lot of attention. We don't pay attention to water quality on poultry farms unless there's a problem. Like, when there is performance is not good, or where there is a disease challenge, when the mortality is higher than it should be, or when the condemnation rates at the processing plants is too high. That's why we start looking at water and say, oh, might be something wrong with the water. So basically, as you said, that water doesn't, we always pay attention to others other than water, but as I mentioned, water is the most important nutrient. That's why we really need to pay attention and change our perspective on how water should be looked at.
Now that we know why water is important, Dr. Moj, we would like to know what are the ways by which birds obtain the water, and then it is only by the water we put into the drinkers, or are there any other ways to get that?
Yeah, usually birds get obtain waters through 3 ways. The major source is what they get through drinkers, drinking water that we provide to them. The second source of water is what they get from the feed, because there is water in the feed as well, like a free water that they can use that. And the last part is that when they eat that feed, and then feed goes through a digestion and absorption, and there is a metabolism processes, water is also being generated in those processes. So for example, when protein molecules are breaking down into different molecules, there is water being generated, so that the animals can also use that part. But again, the main source is the water that is being provided to the animals through the drinkers in the chicken house.
In the poultry industry, Dr. Moj, we have different production systems such as broiler breeders, laying hens, and so on, that are raised for different purposes with differences in the production life cycle, right?
Yes.
However, some poultry growers still restrict the water intake to avoid excessive drinking and negative effects, especially on litter moisture, leg problems, and some other issues on the bird's health. Then, Dr. Mosh, is there any variation in the importance of the water intake by poultry productions or growth phases?
Yeah. So the basic principle, Camila, here is that birds need to have unlimited access, regardless of their life stage. It doesn't matter where they are in their life. But the challenge is that sometimes, as you mentioned, we need to maintain that water intake. But in reality, as birds get older, they drink more water because they need that because they eat more feed, and as a result, they have to drink more water. Especially this becomes more important for laying hens and breeder flocks, because it's not just that they're maintaining their the growth and everything, but also they're producing eggs, table eggs or hatching eggs. So that's why it's very important for those flocks to have access to water. Otherwise, if for some reason they don't have access to water, that could be a very negative impact on the egg production for them. And sometimes it takes a long time for them to come back up again, the production, to comes back up, so that's why it's very important. And the other thing that is impacting water intake during the life cycle of the chickens is the environmental temperature. So under a normal temperature, they are able to maintain what they are supposed to do in terms of their physiological requirements. But when the temperature goes up, during the summer and heat stress, they have to drink more water in order to deal with that extra heat. So that's why we always need to monitor exactly at where stage we are, and also what they are doing to make sure that they have unlimited access.
Now, Doctor, a link between water and feed intake has been established as a directly proportional relationship, and commonly we listen to nutritionists saying that birds will eat if they have available water. Then, Doctor, could you please explain to us a little bit deeper what is that relationship between the water intake and feed intake?
Yeah. Okay. As I mentioned, when the temperature is in a normal range, the ratio usually for water and feed is 2:1. 2 units of water per unit, each unit of feed. But that's just the basic principle there. But again, as birds get older, they eat more feed, so they need to drink more water. The ratio will change. And also temperature, when during the hot summer times. So again, they need to drink more water in order to be able to maintain their body temperature and also their activity. So that ratio 2:1 is usually applicable for a certain time during their life, but it's gonna change as they get older, as things change, or also it depends on their health status, so when they are sick or not. So we need to look at that ratio as a guideline more than anything else. So but every case is different, depends on where we are and depends on what kind of production system we have.
And Dr. Mosh, you mentioned earlier that birds can obtain the water from different sources. And when we think about the feed ingredients, they all have different moisture as they're receiving in the feed meals, and we use multiple feed ingredients for the diet. So how could feed formulation affect the water intake of poultry?
Exactly. So when it comes to definitely feed formulation can have direct impact on water intake, especially in the context of electrolyte balance for them. So for example, if the sodium level of the feed is too high for any reason, is an ingredient or some mixing errors or some formulations. So if the sodium level is too high, so birds need to drink more water in order to get rid of that extra sodium. So and then what happens next? There is going to be more excretion into the litter, and then there is going to be impact on air quality and ammonia production in the chicken house, and then some intestinal challenges like coccidiosis and necrotic arthritis. So that's why, as a control measure in feed formulation, there is a dietary electrolyte balance, or DEB, which is looking at sodium, potassium, and chloride. So there is a range, reasonable range depends on the life stage of the birds. So that during the formulation, that it's need to look at that to make sure that we are within the range, depends on the life stage. And the other consideration is that in some regions, for example, the sodium level in the water is too high. So when birds getting the feed, also the sodium is coming from this water as well. So nothing wrong with the feed, but there is a lot coming from the water. So that's why we need to take that into the account when we are formulating diets. That's why, as we are going to discuss later, that's why it's very important to really emphasize the importance of testing water to see what kind of water your birds are drinking, to make sure that you are not feeding extra like mineral, especially sodium and chloride to your birds on the farm.
Well, with the last question, I think we can move from the feed mills to the farm. Then what will be the ideal quality parameters for drinking water, and what are the methods to assess water quality?
Yes, as we mentioned earlier, so of course, access to water is the first step, right? But that's not the whole story. You want to make sure that your birds have access to good quality water. So water quality is not fixed, it changes all the time. For example, because of the environment has a lot of influence on water quality. If we have too much rain or the season is too dry, so everything can impact the water quality. That's why it's very important for us to really test water at least a few times per year, the water on the farm, to make sure that we understand exactly what we are dealing with, what kind of water our birds are drinking. And in terms of the parameters that, common parameters that we use for water quality is pH, and also the chemical content, including minerals and other elements like iron and manganese, and also bacterial contamination. So it's very important to really know, how can I say, when you look at the water, it may look good, okay to us, but that's not probably the water that they should be receiving. That's why it's very important to have a good understanding of what we are providing to our birds. So that's why, maybe depends on the resources and everything. It's good to have at least 3 or 4 times water sampling every year. And also just from the water, not just the drinking waters, because the water system is starting from the source all the way to the drinkers in the chicken house. You need to make sure that you have a good picture of the whole process here by your samples. And also Dr. Watkins also recommends that to take swabs from the water lines to make sure that we have a good understanding, especially on the bacterial side, because water may not necessarily reflect that level. But if you go with taking swabs, that might be a good indication of what exactly happening. So that's why we need to keep working on that, to have a good baseline on the farms to see what we are dealing with. And the other thing is that, now these days, especially in the US and some other countries, we have a production system like antibiotic-free production system, no antibiotics ever. So it's very important to provide birds with very good quality water in this system, because this system have a little bit of challenges in terms of maintaining the bird's health, and you don't want to create another challenge by providing the quality water that is not of good quality. So that's something that we need to keep in mind under this antibiotic free and no antibiotics ever production system. And the other thing is that in the industry these days we add a lot of products into the water, vitamins, electrolytes, vaccines, probiotics, everything, and organic acid. So it's very important to make sure that those water lines are kept clean, because when you add those organic products into the system, that can create a problem, environment, especially for bacteria. So you want to make sure that, you keep, take good care of, the water lines, and to keep them clean when you're using those products.
Dr. Moch, following to this question, what are the most common water quality problems when you do consultancy?
Yes, exactly. So as we discussed earlier in our interview, water doesn't get a lot of attention on the farms. We usually don't care about mostly feed. That's why we pay a lot of attention to. And then when there is a problem with the performance, when there is a problem, for example, if you have necrotic enteritis keeps coming back, we cannot deal with that, we cannot control. So that's why we start looking at water. Maybe there is something wrong. Maybe the source of contamination is water, the bacteria. So that's why the water quality is very important. So there are 4 categories of water quality that, we need to pay attention. The first one is chemical content. minerals and other elements. So if the levels are too high in the water, so they can cause mechanical damage to the system, like to the water lines, to the drinkers. That's the first one. The second one is these high levels of chemical content can also impact birds' performance, because when you provide the water with this high chemical content, bird might be able to tolerate that for a certain period of time, but at some point they are not going to tolerate that, so that can impact the performance and health. And then again, when the water is constantly high in this chemical content, that can create an environment, a buildup or biofilm in the system. And that biofilm or buildup materials can be a good environment for bacteria to grow and replicate. So that's another problem. The last problem here is that those bacteria contamination in the water can have like two implications for the birds. They may directly impact the birds' health. So because if the water is contaminated with bacteria or anything else, so you have E. coli infections, you have other diseases like infectious bronchitis, because they can be transmitted through water as well. So that's one aspect. Those contamination in the water can also directly impact food safety, like Campylobacter and Salmonella. They may not have direct impact on the birds, but they can have a lot of implication for the food safety. They can increase the bacterial load on the farm, and then when those birds go to the processing plant, that can create a lot of concern in terms of food safety. So basically, that's why we really need to have a very good sanitation program on the farm. We need to regularly review our program. Sometimes it may not work because we assume that it's working, but it's not actually working. So that's why we always need to go back and check to see what kind of programs we are using. Is it working? Because something that may work for our neighbor's farm may not work for us. So that's why we always need to make sure that the sanitation programs are in place and they are working properly.
Finally, Dr. Mosh, what are the farm factors that avoid a good water intake? And would you give any advice to poultry producers to improve water intake?
Yes, exactly. So again, we discussed about water quantity and quality. So make sure that your birds always have unlimited access to water with good quality. So one of the most common problems that we see on the farm is that, so because the water pressure or water flow is not high enough, and then there is not enough water in the water lines and the drinker lines. So that's why when you go, especially to the back end of the chicken house, the water doesn't get there because the flow is not there. There is not enough pressure for the water to go there. And then birds in that area may not get water. So that can impact their performance and also welfare. And this is even more important for laying hens, especially when they keep them on the cages, or also broiler breeders, the flock, because they can have direct impact on egg production in those flocks. And then that's why, as I mentioned earlier in the interview, that it's not easy to bring that egg production back. So that's why we always need to pay attention that there is unlimited access to the water. And the other challenges on the farm is that because we use a lot of products and the water quality always changes, the pH, chemical, sometimes water tastes a little bit weird. And when the water taste doesn't good, birds reduce their intake to make sure that they don't take that water that they don't like. So that's why, again, going back to testing the water to make sure that the quality of water is good, the pH is not extreme, is not too high or too low. So that's why we always need to keep an eye on the water quality that we have by testing the water at least a few times per year. And then it's very important when you test the samples and then you get the results back, you always get a profile on all the tests that they have done. And then you see what the water quality at your farm, and also what could be the maximum and what you need to do in order to make sure that the quality is there always.
Dr. Mosh, thank you for sharing your knowledge and accepting our invitation. And
thanks for having me here, and I hope that this information that is helpful to the poultry production system all around the world.
Thank you so much, and to everyone, thanks for watching. I will see you in another Avenues International interview with poultry experts. See you soon.